Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Hanna Shelest. She is a Director of Security Studies and Global Outreach at Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. She is currently in Odessa, a city which regularly experiences Russian attacks. Welcome, Hanna.
Hello, nice to be here.
We are talking now about the third year of Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine and 11th year of Russia's war against Ukraine. And in the city of Odessa, where you are now, you experience both the consequences of the air war with a regular attack of Russian drones and the situation on the Black Sea, where the Ukrainian army has reached, obviously, what we call the denial of access for the Russian Navy to the western part, at least, of the Black Sea. How does it feel, and what are the current outlooks for the both areas of war?
That's really quite an interesting situation, as you reminded us about the 11 years of the war, because partially Odessa was successful in 2014, not experiencing the military actions, even that we've been waiting for the same events as in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, as Russia always saw Odessa as one of the priority regions for their separatist activities. But at the same time, we welcomed Ukrainian Navy. So definitely the development from the scratch of the Ukrainian Navy, understanding of what been the experience in Crimea in 2014, brought Odessa a little bit more prepared, probably than other cities in the mid of Ukraine, to the events of February 2022. And after this, the situation is quite drastic for us, because we fully experience both the direct classical war and the hybrid warfare of the Russian Federation in the not just in the information space, that's always here because Odessa remained as the top priority for the Russian actions, but also in terms of the maritime domain hybrid activities. If you remember, the Russian action started earlier than the full-fledged invasion on the 24th of February. We had several weeks of the de facto blockade of the ports, of the trade, of the sea routes, and that was already understandable that Russia is moving from the land to the sea. That's why when we're coming like 2 years after, de facto, we're at the same situation. We're still under the constant and very serious information attacks. If you follow the information space here, social space here, you see how much efforts Russia is spending. We are under the constant air raids, but in the very sophisticated manner. So it's not the same what Kharkiv is experiencing with the daily heavy shelling or Kherson. But if previously everybody thought that historical UNESCO downtown would not be targeted or the port is something that is important, no. These red lines are crossed. Russia are destroying the UNESCO cultural heritage. They're attacking the civilian infrastructure. So they're acting the same as in the other parts of Ukraine in terms of bringing fear, disbelief in the central government, disbelief in the armed forces, adding to this the information that it is only because your air defense is working we are targeting you or something like this. You know, all these really surreal Kafka-style explanations of what is happening. But also trying to get rid of the ships coming to Odessa port, because starting from the grain deal and later changes, that was a breakthrough. That was a breakthrough because Russia understood perfectly that 70% of the Ukrainian trade is coming by sea. So as soon as you're blocking the sea trade, you're blocking not military Ukrainian Navy, you're blocking the economic income of the country, you're blocking the activities, you're blocking what really brings money and certain sustainable development, not only for Odessa, but for Ukraine. That's why these activities continue, both with mines, with the attacks. It's improved, but it is still there. And almost each attack that we're experiencing, one of the targets is always the seaport.
This is already a number of highly interesting topics we will discuss further during this interview. But before we do so, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel. We are talking to Hanna Shelest, who is Director of Security Studies and Global Outreach at Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. Hanna, you have already mentioned the Green Deal and the blockade of by Russian Navy of the Ukrainian ports, including Odessa. Now it looks that Ukraine has managed to clean the way to the Bosporus Strait and further to the seas, and the Russian Navy cannot blockade the Odessa port or Mykolaiv port anymore. Was it a full success of what Ukrainians did, or is not fulfilled yet?
It's not a full success, and I will easily explain the reasons. Let's have a brief history. So we are speaking about not only Odessa, but also Pivdennny and Chernomorsk, three big ports that are just 30 kilometers around each other, so-called Big Odessa. And these ports always been specialized in the grain, containers, coal, fertilizers, that being the biggest income for the cities, and especially container shipping, because containers for the last 30 years been developing increasingly, and even a lot of types of the grains being shipped in containers, not in the bulk ships. So when the Russians blocked, they blocked everything. Around 20 ships were also blocked in the port, so they stayed for the 2 years. And when in July 2022 we signed the grain deal, this grain deal was about only two types of the goods, grain and fertilizers, but with the condition that all ships, all cargoes would be examined and inspected by the quadruple team of UN, Turkey, Russia, and the United Nations team in Bosphorus. But to examine, as you understand, it can be only the bulk ship. So you can open and you can see what is inside. And it means that, for example, all those grains that are not wheat or barley, that you're not exporting in that amount, yes, that been previously exported by the containers, already you cannot ship it. Yep, you cannot ship any other type of the goods. And that was the situation for 1 year when Russia constantly delayed the process in Bosphorus. So, for example, they can inspect only 3 ships per day. And you had the days when 100 ships been waiting. For those few days when Russia been going out from some kind of protest, the team of Turkey, Ukraine, and the United Nations been expecting 8 ships. So almost 3 times more easily without any difficulties. So de facto, Russia was sabotaging. And with each month it was sabotaging more and more. You can find wonderful diagrams and graphics that Black Sea News are being created each month about the number of the ships checked, waiting, and all these sabotage activities. What happened after Russia withdrew from it? Ukraine started to work with the other cargoes. So in addition to the ships that now started to go, because nobody is inspecting them in Bosphorus, so it is better flow of the ships. And each day we have 5-6 ships leaving only Odessa port, not speaking about others. We also started to see metal scrap, some other goods being also exported. But, and here is the big but. The big but are containers. So container shipping is still totally blocked. And it's blocked because, not because of the Russian convoys or inspections or something, but because of the operational situation. Because containers you need to bring to the port to save them and then to upload to the ship. That takes time, even that it can be very quick for the uploading, but it is longer for the accumulating these containers in the port. And if the port is under the daily attacks by the Russian missiles or drones, that's understandable that most of the exporters don't want to use this risk to increase the risk for their goods. And these type of the goods are now moved by the land routes, what is 10 times more expensive. It is longer, and definitely it's limited exports and imports of a lot of goods through Odessa port. And I would say that it is at least 50% of the operations that we still would not be able to restore.
But this is, of course, although it is, of course, unfortunate, this demonstrates that at least the road is free. And here we see an interesting development that what the United Nations celebrated as a deal with Russia, practically guaranteeing Russia rights to control what is going on in international waters or even in sovereign waters of Ukraine or other nations. This deal worked worse than usage of blank force, and the Ukrainians have pushed the Russian Navy out of this area. Now the Russian Navy vessels do not dare to enter these waters, otherwise they can be sitting targets for the Ukrainian drones or missiles. What was the reaction of other Black Sea nations to this development, as Ukraine could interdict the Russian Navy access to certain areas of the Black Sea?
Ukraine limited Russian access to the certain areas after the sinking of the Moscow ship. So that was the first, even not the grain deal, but that was the first, and then the liberation of the Snake Island, because that made Russian ships much more vulnerable, and they stopped coming directly and very close to the Ukrainian territorial waters. But we need to understand what is really harming the navigation. It's not only the Russian ships being near the territorial waters in the international waters or something like this. Don't forget that in the beginning of the war, Russia threw approximately 400 sea mines, just throwing them in the Black Sea without any control. So some of them being captured even in Bosphorus, not speaking about the Romanian territorial waters and Bulgarian beaches. So, and in Odessa region, we have it almost weekly, the new mine coming. Then it was the Kakhovka Dam, and after it, a lot of the landmines also started to come. Plus the Russian aviation, because they're constantly coming and shelling. And the last few months since summer, we have that they are throwing the aerial bombs to the territorial waters. Many of them, that's how they are trying to close the Danube ports. And they were damages of the ships there in the mouth of Danube. And the last but not the least, it is the direct threat of the missiles. Because when missile or the drones are thrown from Crimea, let's say, for example, or from the jet, you never know what will be the moment where it falls. We are speaking about any type of the malfunctioning or the bad targeting, or, I mean, the coordinates or interception. There are plenty of risks, and that is the risk that nobody can really control. The fact that the grain deal, what they've been promising, that nobody is attacking or even coming with the drones to the certain corridor from two sides where the ships were coming. And at that time, they were coming by the recommended routes for the navigation. The current route is purely in the territorial waters of the littoral states. So that's make it safer for the missiles at least, but only after you leave the Ukrainian territorial waters and enter the Romanian territorial waters. So partially that saves only one problem from all those that I named. But psychologically, yes, definitely, that's brought Russia to the conditions where there are not so many leverages, how they can push to the new grain deal. Only if they target a civilian ship going, yeah. But here we see how they manipulate very often and find, like, in between the lines, even with the grain deal. For example, it was understandable their demand why they need to inspect ships coming to Ukrainian ports, because they were checking that other nations are not delivering weapons to Ukraine like this. Okay, Turkey were ready to buy these, so not to violate Montreal Convention. But why all those ships that are leaving Ukrainian ports also being checked and waiting the same time or even longer? So you're with a grain, you're in the mid of summer where the grain needs to be delivered quickly, and you are waiting for a week or two to be checked near the Bosphorus. So that's understandable that what Ukraine, in what time, how it what it is about the war, why the ships from Odessa port should be checked. But that's really gave the leverage to Russia just to manipulate and to influence the export of Ukrainian goods. At the same time, Russian ships with the grain coming from Novorossiysk, for example, never been checked. So that's also brought quite a significant and strange situation. If the two countries are in war, why the ships only of the one country are checked?
Indeed, but we are not talking only about the expert from Odessa. Odessa has also another very important role in the region. It is the largest Ukrainian city close to Moldova, and Russia-controlled part of Moldova, Transnistria. And during the last weeks, we have observed Russia's attempts to escalate the situation in Moldova, practically playing the court of gaining some sort of additional control over this part of Moldova, Transnistria. Can Russians hope that they can influence the situation there, or is it just like psychological political pressure over the against the authorities of Moldova?
Let's not forget that this year Moldova would have elections. So definitely Moscow would use any methods, any instruments that they have to destabilize situation in Moldova. Transnistria is only one. The fact that the last weeks we have the developments in both autonomous regions, in Gagauzia and in Transnistria. And situation there is differently. Gagauzia being ethnically neither Moldovan nor Russian, but they always been under the significant influence of Moscow. Even if they receive more money from Turkey, but they're absolutely Russian speakers, and they had just a few days ago visited Moscow, made a nice photo with Putin, and that's and the fact that the region is controlled by the pro-Russian forces with very strong connections. We see how Russia manipulated the situation in 2014, organizing the referendum there. They are now continuing with the same message. So because everybody is paying attention only to Transnistria, de facto we can lose Gagauzia in terms of the political influence and proxies over there in the region. Now, what is interesting that Ukrainian Gagauzians recently spoke very negatively against their fellows in Moldova, exactly after the photo with Putin. And that was the very interesting indicator how the same ethnic minority living in two neighboring countries having absolutely different attitudes towards Moscow. What is in Transnistria? The situation is, on the one hand, more complicated because it is still the Russian armed forces there. We are speaking approximately about 1,400 people, plus the Russian old Soviet ammunition stockpiles. But at the same time, the situation is more interested because we know that Transnistria is de facto blocked between Moldova and Ukraine. So they don't want to be in war. And all the research about this region for the last 2 years demonstrated that they try to mitigate as much as possible these Russian attempts to involve them in war. Even the Russian forces there, approximately 70% of them, yes, they're Russian citizens, but they're locals. So locals understand that they would be fighting at their land, that would be a problem to their economy, to their lives, and that they don't have that much effort. I mean, they have maybe more weapons than Moldova, but that's still much less than what had Romania or Ukraine or any other country that would like to have. Plus, a lot of time they've been spending just in receiving salaries, but not in the actual training or maintenance of the equipment. Plus, for the last 10 years, Russia was not able to make the proper maintenance or supply of their forces there. That's also limits their capacities, and we need to understand it. Still, what can be provocations, the work of FSB, any type of the terroristic acts, any type of the border provocations or attempts to even, for example, to explode the stockpiles of ammunition and to pretend that it was the Ukrainian drone. These attempts happened a year ago, for example. So to bring a fire to the region, yes, that is possible. And here a lot of work probably and questions would be to the OSCE, because they are the only one who still have the monitors and observers there and who had access to both sides. So they are able to report on time in case the significant changes are happening.
But to make the situation clear, as you described, like for our audience, as you described, the Transnistria Strait is completely closed between Ukraine and Moldova, has no access to the sea or to any other country except of Moldova government-controlled areas of Moldova and Ukraine. Gagauzia is in a similar situation. They are between Moldova, Ukraine, and Romania, if I'm not mistaken. So the Russians cannot, even if the Russians could have bring like naval vessels to the western part of the sea, they could not bring like additional troops there, or they cannot like send transport planes to bring forces. So is it like purely attempt to destabilize the situation using what they have on the ground, right?
De facto, yes, they tried to send the different agents, but the Moldovan security forces really worked much better for the last 2 years, understanding the threat. So they are very well aware. And we know a lot of cases how the Russian citizens were declined entrance to Chisinau airport. So that's been happening. Theoretically, the only entrance that still remained, but it is very risky in terms of the operations. It means that all others failed. It is if you quickly come from the south, from the Black Sea, for example, with the jet or with the helicopters, by the mouth of Danube and just entering from the south, the Transnistria. It would be risky because de facto you still need to cross several kilometers of the Ukrainian Air Force. And as I said, that's only the question if everybody loses the situation. With the drones, it's still possible because we had already the situations that the Russian drones been falling at the Moldovan territory, and that they were trying to go by the river and by the Dniester and coming closer over there. So there are, for drones, there are possibilities, but drones would not change the situation in terms of the supply or in terms of the personnel.
Indeed. We're continuing our conversation with Hanna Shelest, who is Director of Security Studies and Global Outreach at Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. And don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to our channel, and you will be informed about our new interviews. But currently I want to switch the topic. And I know that your organization is very active on the field of creating new relations for Ukraine in the countries which did not belong to the focus of the Ukrainian foreign policy for decades, especially in the Southeast Asia and in other regions of the world which have increasingly important economic and military role for Ukraine. Think about the ammunition from South Korea, but where Ukraine was not so actively present recently. What are the positions of these countries? How do they look at the Russo-Ukrainian war?
I don't like the word the global south as usually used for these regions, because that is definitely quite a diverse community of the countries. And because of these, many of them had different experience, different alliances and partnership, different political preferences as for now. So we have an extremely diverse picture. What we definitely know that Russia been actively working for the last 30 years in all these countries. Doesn't matter right, left, democratic or more autocratic. Russia been working because they had the diplomatic presence. What Ukraine didn't have in many of these countries, and didn't have the enough capacity and money to be present in terms of the political, in terms of the visits, in terms of the contacts, in terms of the soft power and public diplomacy. So now we're de facto trying to catch up with what we've been neglecting for many years. At the same time, we have countries that clearly immediately realized what is happening and took the strong position, like Japan. Here, no questions. What is interesting, Guatemala suddenly became one of the leaders in the Latin American region who understood, joined Crimean platform, and we had our friends. With other countries, the problem was originally that we thought they just understand what does mean the rules-based order, human rights, and how important that is. We underestimated that Russia played perfectly on the anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism in many of these countries. and also presenting it as anti-imperialism. So all that Soviet narrative that worked well, meaning that Russia is against empires, not Russia is empire. And the question when we started to speak that Ukraine being a colony of Russia for centuries, and we even received the surprise, like, eyebrows in Africa, you are white, you cannot be a colony. So on the certain moment, we needed to reframe our narratives and starting explaining, we just realized that, first of all, many of these countries are not supporting Ukraine just because they don't know what is happening. Because they are perfectly living at the certain information bubbles. Many of the information agencies are just reposting Russian information agencies because they're free of charge compared to Reuters, for example. Yeah. So it's just came naturally, and we need to break this wall. And for this, what we really need to do is to go there and to speak directly with these people, because sometimes we don't feel nuances, what touch people, what don't touch. A big surprise for me was, for example, that India, being a nuclear country, doesn't want to speak about nuclear security. They are not interested in this topic. That's not the topic that really touches them. But at the same time, they were absolutely open to speak about food security. Even that we thought originally, our assumption that food security is probably more the question for the African countries. Then you came with that's really so many nuances and details that without coming to the region, without speaking directly with these people, you would not be able to feel the moods and to understand the needs and what are the common topics. We suddenly received a very interesting support from Singapore, who was very interested in disinformation and in maritime security. Small country, but they understand that because of their ethnic composition, because of their neighbors, because where they are, there is two spheres where maybe they don't care what is happening in Ukraine, but they care about experience of Ukraine. So we can speak from how we can be useful for you by sharing our lessons learned and experience. It's not that we need to share the threat, because when you come to many countries, they openly says, but do you understand that you are not a global conflict for us? You're regional conflict. So explain us why we should care about you. Yeah, morally we understand that that is bad, that you have refugees, you have destruction, everything. Yeah, Russia is bad, but why should we care? And that's to find these nuances, why they should care, what are those interesting elements, and what are the transnational or even transcontinental effects. That's how we are getting these countries, because with many Southeast Asian countries, for example, we started to explain that we understand that China is bigger threat for you than Russia. You de facto don't care about Russia. But look, China is now learning the lessons from Russia, both in terms of tactics, how war can be conducted, but also in terms of the international reaction. So they are looking, okay, sanctions are not effective, or what mechanisms we can, preventive mechanisms implement, so your sanctions would not be effective to us. Or, okay, we understand that West would not go after this. Yeah, that is their limit in terms of actions. Why not to try? Let us try to do this, or this. So, all of these, and suddenly they start opening like, okay, so you think that China can go, let's say, attacking, it can be hybrid actions or direct, if Russia is winning, because they understand that the West is weak and are not capable of facing this. We said, yes, we already see the indicators, and you have a switch. Oh, that's interesting. Let's talk now. Maybe we can help. So that is probably now we are in this period of, search, of experiencing, of trying, of learning, but not only telling. And that is the huge difference between probably our activities before 2022 and now, because originally we were coming just advocating. Now we are coming to learn, so to understand how we can be useful and interesting to each other.
It is extremely interesting what you are sharing now, this information. But we know that some countries like South Korea or Japan, which you have already mentioned, they do supply a lot of support, like ammunition, equipment, also macro-financial support to Ukraine. What countries could join this coalition from the Southeastern Asia?
Let's be honest, South Korea is not openly supplying us with any ammunition yet. That's what we are working on. They try to do it through the third countries because according to their legislation, they cannot do it to the country in war. And even in South Korea, where we've been in December, I cannot say that the position is so strict. On the one hand, they are absolutely recognizing Russian aggression and that Ukraine is a victim and Ukraine needed to be supported. But at the same time, they are not imposing a lot of sanctions against the Russian Federation. Or they are looking at the situation as, okay, but we can continue trading or doing some of other stuff. So they are still trying to balance, also partially because of China and because of North Korea. They're trying not to spoil relations with Russia that much that Russia would destabilize situation in their region. And that is the fear of a lot of countries, especially in Southeast Asia. With Japan, that's a little bit easier because let's not forget that Japan is still, from the legal point of view, in the state of war with Russia after the Second World War. But at the same time, they don't have the armed forces. So there are also limits to what they can supply to us. What still can be done from the region? There are not so many countries that can supply us with what Ukraine needs. Because we don't have so many Asian countries that are producing weapons. They've been usually the buyers of even Ukrainian weapons. But some of them are important trade partners, and you understand that we need the economic activity. We need their voices in the United Nations and other organizations. That's very important. And what is much more important, we need them to join sanctions because Russia is using a lot of these countries to bypass sanctions of the European Union and the US. They are using these countries for the gray export, and they are using these countries for the supply of the technologies that are important for the weapons production, such as microchips, for example. And the last but not the least, many of these countries bought in the past the Soviet ammunition and equipment. So now Russia is trying to buy it back, and sometimes even very, very old equipment, like last year it was the contract that they bought in Cambodia, the weapons that de facto been produced in 1950s. But who cares? If it is the tank, this tank is driving, so it can be used at the battlefield.
It is indeed what they do with North Korea, as North Korea supplies, obviously, Russia with ammunition which is decades old and sometimes malfunctions. But if you don't care about your soldiers, it makes no difference. You just send another 100,000 of artillery shells to the front line. But if you mentioned already the situation on international platforms like the United Nations or international forums, do you notice some change of the attention towards what is happening in Ukraine after the Hamas attack on Israel? Wasn't the attention focus changed after that?
I would say that if you speak about the international organizations, no, we are still there because it is a little bit different process, and here it is easier to keep attention. But if you speak about international media, yes, surely. And that's been absolutely predictable. It's not because it is Israel-Palestinian. Any conflict that is in the very hot stage and the news stage, that is something for the news. That is something to catch attention. And when you have the important countries and countries that are cared about the world, that's even more attention that you are getting there. But we see that that was the situation before the new year. After the new year, the situation started to rebalance, and now we have both, again, Ukraine and Israel in the news agenda. But then the situation depends on the countries. That's understandable that for the all Arab states, it is much more attention paid to the Israel-Palestinian because it is closer to their shore, to their hearts, and all their news lines are there. If you speak about the European countries, that's understandable that Ukraine is always closer to them, and that is more about the domestic issues that can overcome the news agenda. But if we speak about the United Nations, that depends on your ambassadors, that depends on the agenda items, that depends on your friends in the Security Council who are able to put your question to the agenda. And here, that's better understanding that you cannot have a war fatigue and the war continues.
Indeed, the war is far from come to its end. We have severe fighting along the whole front line in Ukraine, and Ukrainian cities and towns are getting shelled every day, every night. People are dying, and Vladimir Putin and Russia are not planning to stop this war, withdraw their troops. Quite the opposite. They plan new attacks, including maybe other regions in the world or other countries, if we speak about hybrid attacks, sabotage, and other hostile actions. We were talking to Hanna Shelest, who is the Director of Security Studies and Global Outreach at Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism. She's now in Odessa. She's based there, a town which repelled Russian attack in the beginning of this war, but is until now under constant Russian attacks with drones, missiles, and other military equipment. Thank you, Hanna, for your support. Thank you for your insights, and take care.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your support to Ukraine.
And don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel. You will be informed about other interviews which appear on our channel. We are working further, asking Ukrainian voices about Ukraine and trying to be a part of this mechanism spreading Ukrainian voice and Ukrainian point of view in the world. Take care and stay tuned.